Mike Williams unlocked the door to his small townhouse, kicked off his boots, and wandered into the kitchen. He had just dropped off his wife, Lisa, at the train station for her BI weekly 3-day business trip. Lisa worked as a project manager for a company led by Greg Lawson, whom Mike sarcastically referred to as Mr. Big Shot. Lisa often reminded Mike that her boss wasn't his biggest fan. "Mike, Greg just doesn't get your sense of humor," she would say. Mike never admitted it, but he enjoyed poking fun at Greg, finding him overly pretentious. Checking the clock on the wall, Mike noted it was only 7:30 a.m. He had enough time to brew another cup of coffee and check his emails before heading out to the auto shop. Though not particularly tech-savvy, he used email to stay in touch with old friends from vocational school, where he had studied automotive repair. Now in his mid-30s, Mike was one of the lead mechanics at a local car dealership. Despite his title, he loved getting his hands dirty alongside his team. His job occasionally required late nights or the odd trip out of town, but nothing compared to Lisa's constant travel. She had been at her new job at Reynolds Lawson for 6 months, having climbed the ladder from an administrative assistant to a project manager after completing a series of certifications. Mike and Lisa met in college over a decade ago and had been married for 7 years. They had saved diligently to buy their modest home, pooling their resources while Mike started at the dealership and Lisa worked at a real estate office. Their combined efforts paid off, allowing them to secure a down payment on their house. After finishing his coffee, Mike headed to the spare room to use the computer, hoping Lisa hadn't logged off. He smiled at the screensaver, a picture from their vacation in the Smoky Mountains, showing them hiking with wide grins. He had wanted a picture of their dog as the screensaver, but Lisa had overruled him. Mike moved the mouse, and an email from Lisa's work account popped up. His eyes skimmed the subject line, catching the word accessory. Confused, he hesitated before opening the message. As he did, Mike felt a chill run down his spine. The email was short but shocking, Lisa. "I hope you got my last message. Please remember to bring that red dress I bought you last time, the one with the gold detailing. We didn't get a chance to enjoy it on our last trip. My first meeting tomorrow isn't until noon, so we could have some time before then. Greg." Mike read the email over and over, struggling to process what it meant. Lisa was having an affair with her boss, Greg. He sat back stunned, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of him. After a moment, he stumbled to his feet, accidentally knocking over the chair. Mike remembered seeing the dress in Lisa's drawer just before she left, but now it was gone. Desperate to dismiss it as a joke, he rifled through her things, but the dress was missing. Lisa had mentioned it was a bargain find at a department store, but she had never worn it for him. Mike's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Lisa had always been loving and supportive, and there had been no obvious signs of trouble in their marriage. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that she was cheating. Returning to the computer, Mike began digging through her emails looking for answers. He found a folder marked Personal, filled with messages from Greg. Opening the first one, Mike's face paled as he read it twice. It detailed an expensive dinner and a night out, thanking her for a great evening and making a suggestive comment about their next trip. Mike felt sick. He printed out the emails, called into work sick, and continued reading through the messages. As he absorbed the details, tears welled up in his eyes. His marriage, as he knew it, was over. After ensuring he had copies of the most damning emails, Mike logged out of Lisa's account and into his own. He created a new folder to store all the forwarded messages and changed his passwords for extra security. Feeling numb, he made his way back to the kitchen, grabbed a beer, and sat at the table. Rereading the emails, Mike realized how deep the deception ran. Lisa had been told she needed to accompany Greg on her second day at Reynolds Lawson, ostensibly to handle client meetings. But now it seemed clear that Greg had been setting her up from the start. Some trips were clearly unnecessary, designed to spend more time together. The first email in the personal folder was from Greg, thanking her for the lovely evening and hinting at a luxurious gift, a designer purse she had shown Mike. claiming it was a cheap knockoff. The ease with which she had lied to him was nauseating. Mike learned that they frequently stayed at the same hotel, booking separate rooms as a cover. Lisa would join Greg after Mike's nightly calls, and the emails often joked about how predictable his schedule was. Each revelation cut deeper, making Mike realize how thoroughly he had been betrayed. Lisa had told Mike that the stunning necklace she wore to the Christmas party was just a cheap accessory, but Mike now knew better. Greg's thank you note for an extravagant gift from Lisa hinted at more than just a professional relationship. One email mentioned Greg's condo, triggering a memory of Lisa casually mentioning her boss's place with a view of the downtown park. It seemed they often met there, perhaps under the guise of working lunches or meetings, with Lisa being careful not to leave any trace. By midday, Mike had reread every email, realizing he needed a plan before Lisa returned with Greg. She usually arrived back early Friday morning, taking a cab home and calling Mike at work to let him know she was safe. Ironically, the real danger had already come and gone while she was away. Mike grabbed a couple more beers and sprawled out on the couch, realizing it had been nearly 5 hours since he dropped Lisa off at the station, only for her to head straight into Greg's arms. They had orchestrated this affair perfectly, with Mike rarely spotting Greg when dropping Lisa off. Occasionally, Greg was in the waiting area but always pretended not to see them. By 6:00 p.m., Mike was barely conscious, having made multiple trips to the bathroom and kitchen for more beer. When he went for another, he found the fridge empty and stared at the 12 empty bottles on the table. He had finished both 6 packs he had bought the previous day. Exhausted and running on empty, Mike collapsed on the bed, fully clothed, and passed out. At 10:15 p.m., the phone rang, waking him from a foggy haze of memories of happier times with Lisa. He guessed it was her, checking why he hadn't called her at the Marriott, as was his habit. The memories of what he'd discovered flooded back, and he decided to wait until she was home to confront her. The answering machine picked up just as he managed to grab the phone. "Hello, is that you, Lisa?" "Yes, it is me," she replied. "Why didn't you call? You always do." "Is something wrong?" Her voice carried a note of concern, and Mike nearly lashed out but restrained himself. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I fell asleep," he said, trying to sound casual. "What is going on?" "You've never done this before?" she insisted. Mike almost confessed, but instead said, "I had a couple of beers after work, and I guess they knocked me out." He quickly changed the subject. "So how was your day? Busy? I hope Greg isn't working you too hard." Lisa hesitated. "No, it wasn't a busy. Why do you ask? You never inquire about my work." "Just curious," Mike replied, keeping his tone light. "How are things going with you? Everything okay?" "Of course." "Why are you asking?" she replied, sounding a bit nervous. "Just kidding." "I trust you completely," he lied, the words bitter in his mouth. There was a pause before Lisa said, "Of course you do. You've never said anything like that before. Forget about it. I didn't mean anything by it. I'll probably head to bed soon. The beers are making me sleepy." "Okay, Mike. Get a good night's rest. Love you." Mike couldn't bring himself to say it back. "Yeah, you too." "Good night, Lisa." He hung up, went to the bathroom, and then sat by the phone, waiting for a few minutes before calling the Marriott and asking for room 312. After several rings, he hung up, not surprised when no one answered. They were likely mocking him, expecting him to call earlier. The thought of them laughing together at his expense brought tears to his eyes as he stumbled back to bed. The next morning, Mike didn't feel guilty about his drinking binge. After a shower, he felt a bit better and decided to go to work. However, he couldn't stop thinking about Lisa. He went through his day mechanically, his co-workers noticing his distraction. Relieved when the day finally ended, he picked up some fast food burgers and fries, comfort food he usually avoided, and washed them down with a couple of beers. He knew he couldn't continue drinking like this every night, leaving the second six-pack untouched. At 8:00 p.m., Mike called room 312 at the Marriott again, but no one answered after several rings. According to the emails, Lisa was usually in her room from 9:30 to 10:00 for their nightly calls. Experimenting, he called every half hour, making his fourth call at 9:25. Each time there was no answer. Finally, at 9:45, Lisa picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mike, you are calling just in time. I was about to get under the covers but waited for your call," she laughed. Mike forced a smile. "Didn't sleep tonight, Lisa? Just watching TV and waiting to call you?" "Yeah, just watching TV," she replied, sounding casual. "Took a long hot bath earlier." "That is good," Mike said, trying to keep the conversation light. "You should be well rested for tomorrow. We've got plans, remember?" Lisa giggled. "Already planning things, huh? I can wait." After a few more minutes of small talk, Mike ended the call. "I have a couple more things to do before bed. See you tomorrow. Bye, sweetie. Looking forward to tomorrow night. Love you." Mike hung up without responding, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. Mike waited another 15 minutes before dialing room 312 again, but once more no one picked up after several rings. The next day he dragged himself to work but left early after lunch to be home when Lisa arrived from the station. He knew they couldn't continue living under the same roof and was bracing himself for one of them to leave. By 1:00, he sat at the kitchen table, feeling hollow but determined to keep his composure. As he reflected on their life together, the memories of good times felt like they belonged to another person. The recent revelations seemed surreal, like a bad dream he couldn't awake from. He was rinsing a cup at the sink when he heard the front door open and Lisa S. luggage wheels clattering down the hallway. She walked into the kitchen, looking surprised to see him. "Mike, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work?" she asked, her surprise quickly turning into concern. "I've been waiting for you, Lisa," he replied calmly, without a hint of emotion. "Why?" she asked, now clearly worried. Instead of answering, he tossed a stapled bundle of printed emails onto the table in front of her. Lisa glanced at him, then at the papers, her curiosity turning to shock as she skimmed the contents. Her face drained of color as she read, and when she finished, she threw them back on the table, standing silently. "Well, now you know," she finally said. "How did you get these?" "They were from my work email." "The modem glitched and your email stayed open," Mike managed to say, still keeping his voice steady. "If it weren't tea for that, I might never have known," he continued, his calm exterior barely masking the storm inside. "You've been very good at hiding this affair." Lisa said nothing, pulling out her phone and turning her back to Mike. "He knows," she said into the phone. "It doesn't matter how." "Yes, I'll grab a cab and meet you there. Bye." She turned slightly towards Mike, her expression unreadable. "I am leaving. I am sorry you found out this way. I'll come back tomorrow for the rest of my things." She grabbed her travel bag and headed for the door. "That is it? No explanation?" "You're just sorry I found out this way?" Mike shouted, unable to believe her nonchalance. Lisa turned, looking more resolute. "What is there to explain? I've been seeing Greg a lot, and this is the next step. He's been good to me, and you can compete. I'm sorry." Tears welled up in Mike's eyes as he asked, "Is this about the money, the gifts, the fancy dinners?" Lisa hesitated, then admitted, "The lifestyle is part of it. Greg lives upscale, and I am ready for that." She went to the bedroom, staying there for a few minutes while Mike tried to collect himself. When she returned with a garment bag, he heard a car honk outside. Without another word, she left. Mike watched from the window as the cab driver loaded her luggage. She glanced back, and for a moment he thought she might be crying. Alone in the kitchen, Mike felt like his world had crumbled. The next day, Saturday, he was still in shock when Lisa called around noon saying she would come by to collect the rest of her things, accompanied by her father. When they arrived, Mike sat quietly on the couch watching as they carried out boxes. After a few minutes, Lisa's father, John, joined him. They sat in awkward silence until Mike asked, "Did she tell you what's going on?" John looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Mike. She seems set on this decision. We don't understand why she'd leave you for her boss." Mike sighed. "I guess it's this what he can offer her. She didn't say she loved him or that she stopped loving me." John hesitated before asking, "Does it really matter?" Mike thought for a moment and then replied, "No, she has been with him for months. Even if she wanted to come back, I don't think I could forgive her." They sat in silence until Lisa emerged, saying she had everything she wanted. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she carried a box outside, her father following with another. After they left, Mike found some of Lisa S.'s things still in the closet and drawers. In a fit of anger, he gathered her remaining clothes, makeup, and toiletries, throwing them into garbage bags. He spent the rest of the day lying on the bed, replaying the events in his mind and fantasizing about revenge, but eventually he realized that despite his anger, he wasn't a vengeful person. He decided to focus on moving on, as difficult as that might be. The weekend passed in a haze for Mike. He drank heavily, trying to numb the pain of Lisa S.'s betrayal. By Monday morning, he felt slightly better, beginning to accept the situation. On Tuesday, Mike called Reynolds Lawson to get a forwarding address for Lisa S. mail. The receptionist said Lisa would email him the information. That evening, he received an email with Greg S. condo address. Wednesday morning, Mike was called into his boss S. office to take a phone call. His bank informed him that his mortgage payment had defaulted. After a heated discussion, he discovered that both his and Lisa S. joint accounts were empty, with nearly $20,000 transferred out. Furious, Mike stormed into Reynolds Lawson, bypassing the receptionist, and confronted Lisa. His voice echoed through the office as he accused her of stealing. Greg briefly stepped out of his office before retreating and locking the door. Mike turned back to Lisa, demanding his money back, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. Lisa handed Mike an envelope saying he could have the car, the house, and the furniture. As Mike opened it, 2 security guards approached, warning him to leave or face trespassing charges. He stormed out, calling Lisa a money-grabbing opportunist and shouting at Greg for lurking in the shadows. Outside, Mike checked the contents, a spreadsheet outlining their assets and debts. The split seemed fair at first glance, but Mike quickly realized that selling the house would incur costs not included in the figures. Determined not to be blindsided, Mike visited his bank and set up a line of credit to cover the mortgage and other expenses until he could figure out a more permanent solution. Their joint savings, which he had always relied on for emergencies, were now gone, and he knew it would take time to rebuild his financial stability. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze. The day after his confrontation at Reynolds Lawson, Mike received a letter from a lawyer threatening legal action if he didn't stay away from Lisa and Greg. Furious, he almost responded but decided to avoid escalating the situation. A week later, Lisa officially filed for divorce, using the terms laid out in the spreadsheet. After consulting with a lawyer and realizing the fight would cost more than it was worth, Mike reluctantly agreed to the terms. When not dealing with the fallout, Mike tried to focus on moving forward. 3 weeks after Lisa left, he decided to purge their home of her presence. He dismantled her makeup table, rearranged the furniture, and redecorated the bathroom. The process felt therapeutic. He then tackled the photo albums, removing pictures of her and stashing them away. One night, while going through old photos, he found a picture of himself with Carol, a friend from high school. Curious about her whereabouts, he searched online but found no recent information. 6 weeks after Lisa S.'s departure, Mike was watching late-night TV when he heard a knock at the door. To his surprise, it was Lisa S.'s brother, Robert. "Hey, Robert. Come on in," Mike said, stepping aside. Robert gave Mike a friendly pat on the shoulder. "How's it going, Mike?" "Tried calling, but couldn't get through. I canceled the landline to cut costs." "Just using my cell now," Mike explained, leading him to the living room. "Want a beer?" "Sure, thanks," Robert replied. Mike returned with 2 bottles, and they settled in. "So what brings you here?" "Didn't expect to see you," Mike said. Robert looked uncomfortable. "Lisa visited my wife a couple of days ago. I told her what I thought about her leaving you for her boss. They went to talk in the kitchen, and I eavesdropped a bit." Mike leaned in, eager to hear more. "What did she say?" Robert sighed. "She said she thought you wouldn't forgive her and that while Greg's gifts and lifestyle were appealing, you were actually better for her. She was planning to end things with Greg soon if you hadn't found out." Mike shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "Great. So I am the fool either way. Anything else?" Robert nodded. "Yeah, she mentioned something about Greg calling you her starter husband. It sounds like she saw you as a stepping stone." Mike clenched his fists. Nice to know I was just a rung on the ladder. Don T, let this come between you and Susan, Robert. I need to talk to her without losing my temper. They chatted for a while longer, discussing minor details before Robert left. Alone, Mike pondered the term starter husband, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. The next day, Mike went to the grocery store, determined to make healthier choices. At the checkout, the cashier recognized him. "Hey, aren't you Mike Williams?" she asked. "Yeah, that's me." "How are you, Wendy?" Mike replied, surprised. After catching up briefly, Mike asked, "Do you remember Carol from high school? Any idea what she's up to?" Wendy thought for a moment. "I think she got married and moved away. Her mom still lives in town, though. Her new last name is something like Smith." "Thanks, Wendy," Mike said, feeling a bit nostalgic. They agreed to grab coffee sometime, and Mike left in a better mood. At home, he cooked a healthy dinner and went for a jog, starting a new routine to take care of himself. That evening, Mike found Carol S. Mother S. phone number under Smithson. He called and got Carol S. number, learning she was now widowed. Mike made a note to call her soon, feeling a glimmer of something positive amid the chaos. Over the next few days, Mike's new lifestyle began to lift his spirits, making him more positive at work. However, a short letter from Lisa disrupted his progress. The letter read, "I never thought of you as a starter husband." I was confused. Clearly, the letter was an attempt to explain her actions, but Mike felt it was too little, too late. He replied, "Actions speak louder than words," but received no response. 3 months after Lisa left, Mike received the final divorce papers. Surprised at how quickly the process had moved, likely expedited by Greg, he signed them and toasted his newfound freedom with a single beer, feeling a sense of relief and the start of a new chapter in his life. Mike sent Lisa a final email. "You got what you wanted," and never heard back. That evening, he decided to call Carol Johnson, an old high school friend. She was happy to hear from him, and they spent an hour catching up. Carol shared that her husband, Frank Johnson, had been killed in action in Iraq, leaving her a widow with a 4-year-old daughter named Chrissy. She lived on a survivor-S pension but planned to return to work as a therapist once Chrissy started school. Mike shared the details of his recent divorce, and as their conversation wound down, he asked Carol if she'd like to meet up for dinner or drinks. Carol hesitated, explaining that she wasn't ready to date and was focusing on her daughter. Mike, feeling a bit rejected, wished her well and hung up, reflecting on the finality of his divorce. He grabbed another beer and went to bed, feeling the weight of an emotionally taxing day. The next 2 months passed quickly as Mike settled into a new routine. He avoided new relationships, waiting for thoughts of Lisa to fade. He still thought about her often, but the pain became less sharp over time. To cut costs, Mike had given up his landline and premium cable, relying on newspapers left in the lunchroom by co-workers for news. One morning, during a coffee break, a co-worker handed him a newspaper with a headline that caught his eye. "One dead, one in critical condition." The article detailed a fatal accident involving Greg Lawson and Lisa. Greg had died, and Lisa was in critical condition with alcohol suspected as a factor. Mike read the article twice before tossing it aside. "Can't say I am sorry he's gone. I hope Lisa recovers, but I'm not going to worry about it," he muttered. A co-worker commented on how hard Lisa's departure had hit him. Mike responded, "Reading that article made me realize I can move on. I don't feel the need to rush to her bedside." The incident marked a turning point for Mike, lifting a weight off his shoulders and allowing him to see a path forward. Over the next few days, news confirmed Greg's DUI and Lisa's critical condition. Mike, feeling ready to move on, invited a secretary from work over for dinner. They enjoyed each other's company, and Mike felt a sense of normalcy returning to his life. 2 weeks after the accident, Lisa's brother, Robert, visited Mike. They sat in the kitchen with beers. "What brings you here, Robert?" Mike asked. "Just in the neighborhood. Sorry about Lisa's accident. How's she doing?" Robert explained that Lisa had suffered a severe head injury and was in a medication-induced coma. "It's been tough on our parents. Thank goodness she wore her seatbelt, Greg didn't he, and he paid for it." Mike suggested, "Maybe you should consider suing Greg's estate." Robert sighed. "Dad and I have discussed it. We all decide after she is off the meds and out of the coma if she wakes up at all. Mike expressed concern. Tell your parents I am sorry, but I've moved on with my life. I even had my first date in years. I am sad Lisa got hurt, but I cannot let it drag me down now. They talked about sports and work, avoiding the topic of Lisa until Robert was about to leave. Susan and I are doing better. Seeing the mess Lisa got into made her realize she is happy with me, Robert said. Glad to hear it. Lisa might have influenced Susan a bit. Sometimes the grass looks greener, but it is not, Mike replied. They shook hands, and Robert left. Another 6 weeks passed quickly for Mike with no news about Lisa, whom he assumed was recovering. He started dating again, going out once a week. He enjoyed a few nights with Jean, the receptionist from work, which helped him feel ready to embrace his new life. One Thursday evening, Mike returned from a jog and heard the doorbell. He was surprised to see his former father-in-law, Joseph. "Joseph, what brings you here?" Mike asked, puzzled. "I can stay long." "I'm on my way to the hospital," Joseph replied hurriedly. "We want you to visit Lisa with us tomorrow at 2 p.m. She just woke up this week." Mike looked confused. "Why do you want me to visit her?" "Our marriage ended a long time ago." Joseph insisted. "We'd like you to come. We'll explain everything then. I am in a hurry, so see you tomorrow." He rushed back to his car. The next day, Mike rearranged his schedule, left work early, and headed to the hospital, snacking on fruit as he drove. He arrived at 2:30 p.m. and went to Lisa S.'s room, feeling a mix of emotions. He hadn't seen her since the day he confronted her at her office and hadn't spoken to her since his final email. Lisa was asleep, her hair now short from surgery with a visible scar on her head. She was hooked up to an IV and heart monitors. Mike decided to wait for her parents, feeling awkward and unsure of what to say. After a few minutes, Lisa woke up and smiled at him. "Mike, you are here. Where have you been?" "I've missed you these past few days," she said, her voice weak but cheerful. Taken aback, Mike replied, "I've been at home and work. Why would I be here?" Lisa looked confused. "Why wouldn't you? Why would you go to work or stay home when I was here?" Frustrated, Mike said, "Lisa, we're divorced. You left me for Greg. Why should I visit you? I'm only here because your parents asked me to come." Lisa S.'s reaction was immediate and intense. She started to cry and became agitated, trying to get out of bed. "No, no, no! What are you saying?" she screamed, flailing her arms and ripping the IV out of her arm. The heart monitor began to beep rapidly as alarms sounded, prompting 2 nurses to rush into the room. One of them looked at Mike and asked, "What did you do to her?" as she moved to restrain Lisa. Mike, bewildered, replied, "I didn't do anything, I was just standing here." Lisa mumbled incoherently, thrashing as she tried to free herself. The second nurse said, "I'll get the restraints and call the doctor for sedation," before rushing out of the room. Mike shook his head, muttering, "I think she's lost it," as he walked toward the elevator. Just as he reached the elevator, Lisa S.'s parents arrived. Her mother looked at him anxiously. "You didn't talk to her, did you?" Mike nodded, and she exclaimed, "Oh no, what did you tell her?" She rushed past him, heading into Lisa S.'s room. Mike, still stunned by the chaotic situation, watched briefly before pressing the elevator button. As the doors closed, he saw Lisa S.'s father looking around for him. Mike gave a half-hearted wave as the doors shut, feeling relieved to leave the chaos behind. Back at home, Mike tried to put the strange events out of his mind, concluding that Lisa S.'s psychological issues were best left to her parents and doctors. After a shower, he considered reaching out to Carol Johnson again. If she was unavailable, he would call Jean from the office. Almost hanging up as the phone rang, Mike was pleasantly surprised when Carol answered. "Hi, Carol, it's Mike. I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." "No, I am glad you called. I tried to reach you, but your number wasn't working. I wanted to apologize for being so blunt last time. I've switched to using only my cell phone now," Mike explained. "No need to apologize. I was calling to see if you'd like to have dinner tonight or tomorrow." Carol hesitated. "I have plans with my mom and stepdad tomorrow, and I couldn't find a babysitter for Chrissy tonight. Why not bring Chrissy along?" "I'd love to meet her," Mike suggested. Carol laughed. "Have you ever taken a 4-year-old to dinner? It limits our restaurant choices. Let's find a family-friendly place." I'd really like to take you out, Mike insisted. Carol finally agreed. There's a restaurant Chrissy likes with a great dessert bar. How about that? Perfect. I'll pick you up at 5. Just tell me where it is, Mike replied, feeling excited. Are you sure about taking Chrissy? Carol asked, sounding both surprised and pleased. Absolutely. If she is anything like her mother, it'll be a pleasure, Mike responded warmly. Pleased with the plan, Mike felt optimistic about the evening. They chatted for a bit longer before Carol had to get ready. Mike, happier than he'd been in a long time, hoped the evening would be everything he imagined. Later, lying in bed, Mike replayed the details of his date with Carol and Chrissy in his mind. He smiled, pleased with how well it had gone. He looked forward to Sunday morning, having agreed to join them for church, not so much for the sermon, but to spend more time with Carol and Chrissy. He remembered picking them up, struck by Carol's beauty and confidence. Her short, dark hair suited her, and Chrissy, a miniature version of Carol, was adorable with her dark hair and eyes. Mike had been initially worried about how Chrissy would react to him, but his fears vanished when she held his hand as they walked to the restaurant. Dinner went smoothly, with plenty of conversation. Chrissy often interrupted, asking about words she didn't understand, which Mike found charming. After dinner, he and Chrissy made desserts together, solidifying their bond. After a pleasant evening, Mike walked Carol and Chrissy to their apartment. Chrissy's need for her mother's attention prevented any goodnight kiss, but Mike was content. On Sunday, after church and brunch at IHOP, Carol dropped Mike off at his house. Chrissy reminded him of their plans to visit the zoo, and Mike reassured her, promising not to forget. As he exited the car, he noticed Lisa's parents at his door. Nancy, Lisa's mother, looked upset. "We need to talk to you." "It's very important," Nancy said as Mike invited them in for coffee. Once seated, Nancy explained, "Lisa has been in a terrible state since your visit. She's been hysterical whenever the sedation wears off." Mike asked, "What does this have to do with me?" Nancy replied, "We wanted you to meet with her neurologist first. He can explain her condition." Mike apologized. "I am sorry, I didn't know. But what difference does it make? I hardly said anything to her." Nancy whimpered, and her husband Joseph took her hand before continuing. "The problem is you told her about the affair and the divorce. We wanted to avoid that until she was stronger." Mike, puzzled, asked, "Why wouldn't I mention the affair and divorce? She can think I'd just forget what happened. Greg's passing doesn't mean I'd take her back." Joseph explained, "Lisa had a severe head injury that damaged part of her temporal lobe, causing retrograde amnesia." "Amnesia? But she recognized me and both of you," Mike said, confused. Joseph continued, "She hasn't lost all her memory. She's missing the last year and a half, along with some earlier periods. She thinks you two recently returned from a vacation in Cancun. The doctors believe she might recall more over time, but it is uncertain. So she doesn't remember the divorce or the affair, but lying to her isn't an option. She can get a free pass just because Greg is gone," Mike responded firmly. Joseph nodded. "We don't want to lie. Telling her falsehoods could create false memories. We need to handle this carefully. We need to give her small pieces of the truth to help her fill in the gaps," Joseph explained. "So I shouldn't have mentioned the affair and divorce?" Mike asked, feeling a pang of regret. "Not exactly," Nancy said, regaining her composure. "The doctor advised us to give her information gradually. You overloaded her, which might have triggered some memories, but we don't know how much." Mike felt ashamed. "I'm sorry if I made things worse. I didn't know about her condition." "It's okay, Mike," Nancy reassured him. "We just hope you can help her by triggering her memories. We were wondering if you still had any photo albums. The doctors think pictures might help." Mike stood and looked out the window. "I can help with the albums. They were gone. I threw them out months ago." Nancy looked puzzled. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, they were gone," Mike repeated. "I deleted the pictures I wanted and threw out the rest. I offered them to Lisa, but she wasn't interested." Joseph and Nancy were visibly shocked. Mike added, "I do have some other things that might help, though. Give me 15 minutes. Mike returned with a stack of papers and a CD. "These are the letters I found that revealed the affair," he said, placing the stack in front of Nancy. Who reached out to read them? Mike quickly took them back. There are explicit passages. Consider yourself warned if you decide to go through them, he added. He also handed over copies of the legal letters, including the warning letter from his visit to Reynolds Lawson. The last item was a CD labeled Cancun. These are the only photos I have left from our time together. They include pictures from our vacation in Cancun. Lisa should probably look at them alone. Nancy, holding the papers and CD, looked overwhelmed. They sat in silence for a moment before Nancy spoke. I don't think you'll want to talk to Lisa about what happened. Not right now, Mike agreed. If she wants to talk after going through this and understanding what she did, she can call me, and I might consider it. Joseph asked hopefully, could you consider starting over with her? Mike shook his head firmly. I can risk that. She chose Greg S. Wealth over me, and I can believe a blow to the head would change that part of her. Even if it did, I'm not willing to take that chance. Joseph and Nancy nodded, understanding but disappointed. They thanked Mike for his willingness to talk later if needed. As they left, Carol and Chrissy arrived. Chrissy, excited, exclaimed, "We're going to the zoo to see the elephants." The Canes greeted Carol and Chrissy warmly before driving away. Mike apologized for not being ready and invited them inside while he changed. Soon the trio headed to the zoo, enjoying their day together. Another month passed and Mike was happier than ever. He saw Carol and Chrissy regularly, though they hadn't yet turned their relationship into a more serious one due to Chrissy's presence. Carol suggested getting a babysitter for their next date, and Mike eagerly agreed. On their date night, they watched a movie and danced at a bar with Carol's mom babysitting Chrissy. Returning to Mike's house, they enjoyed some wine and danced to music. After a few sweet kisses, Mike picked up his cell phone. "What are you doing?" Carol asked, smiling. "I'm starting to like this already," Mike said, pressing a finger to her lips. "Give me a minute. I want to talk to your babysitter." Carol, surprised, tried to grab the phone. "Dawn to bother my mother. Why are you calling her?" She stopped struggling when she heard Mike say, "Everything is fine, Mrs. Smithers. I was hoping Carol could stay a little later." "Great. That sounds wonderful." Mike paused, then said, "I like the way you think, Marianne. I'll take care of the sheets. Good night." Ending the call, Mike laughed. Carol, still confused, asked, "What was that about?" Mike grinned. "I'll tell you. I think I'm really going to like your mom. She and I have always gotten along great." Carol looked puzzled. "What did she say?" Mike explained, "Your stepfather, Gary, is at your apartment with her. Chrissy is fine and sleeping, and your mom and Gary are, well, enjoying themselves. Your mom insists you stay here tonight because they're using your bed, and, well, they didn't bring pajamas." Carol's eyes widened. "My mom would never say that. What are you pulling?" Mike laughed. "They were enjoying your wine, and Gary got your mom tipsy. She thinks we're good together and wants you to stay with me. She even said to make sure the sheets are changed in the morning." Carol blushed, still shocked. "I find it hard to believe my mom said that." Mike kissed her and said, "Dawn to forget to change the linens in the morning. Your mom wants us to meet them for brunch at 11 a.m. at IHOP with Chrissy." At 2 a.m., Mike lay on the couch, reminiscing about the wonderful evening with Carol. When they arrived at IHOP the next day, Marianne, Gary, and Chrissy were already there. Both adults smiled, and Chrissy waved excitedly. Mike joked, "Sorry we were late. I had some laundry to do," making Carol blush. During the meal, they joked about blue pills, sheets, and wine, much to Chrissy's confusion. Later in the parking lot, Mike kissed Carol and Chrissy goodbye, feeling optimistic about the future. As Mike hugged Marianne, he whispered, "Thanks for your suggestions. They really helped us take the next step." Marianne chuckled softly and whispered back, "You two are great together." "Gary and I decided to test out his new prescription, too," she added with a playful wink. She then walked to the car with Gary, and Mike waved them off with a smile. Just then, his phone rang. Expecting it to be Carol, he answered with a cheerful, "Hi, it's Mike." To his surprise, the voice on the other end was Joseph S. Mike. S. Joseph. "How are you?" A bit taken aback, Mike responded, "I'm good. What can I do for you, Joseph?" Joseph hesitated before continuing, "Lisa wants to talk to you." She is staying with us right now and was hoping you could come over for coffee. She thought you might not pick up if she called. Mike was surprised by the request. I guess I can. I have no plans today. Should I come over now? Joseph sounded relieved. Yes, we'd appreciate it, thank you. As Mike drove to his former in-laws' house, he couldn't help but feel a mix of nostalgia and tension. This visit felt charged with unresolved emotions. Upon arrival, Joseph and Nancy invited him into the kitchen. After offering him coffee, Joseph said, Nancy and I will leave you and Lisa to talk privately. We'll be in the living room. They left just as Lisa entered and sat across from Mike. Mike was struck by how different Lisa looked. Her hair had grown back but was shorter and styled differently. She appeared thinner, with shadows under her eyes, giving her a more fragile appearance. She looked down, twisting a napkin nervously in her hands. Mike decided to break the ice. You look like you are doing better, Lisa. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you coming over. I hope it wasn't too much trouble, Lisa replied, her voice shaky. No trouble at all. How's your recovery going? Are you starting to remember things? Mike asked, genuinely curious. Lisa shook her head slowly. Only bits and pieces. The doctors and some friends have been helping me piece things together, but it has been hard. Are there specific things you want to ask me about? Mike offered, ready to provide clarity. Lisa looked up, her eyes misty. I have some questions. Susan has been filling in some gaps, but it is all so overwhelming. I can't believe I did those things. I feel like a stranger to myself. Mike stayed silent, listening as Lisa continued. I barely remember anything about Greg. Visiting his apartment felt like walking into a stranger's life. I don't know what I was thinking. How did you find out about the affair? Mike explained how he stumbled upon the incriminating emails, leading him to uncover more about the affair. Lisa pulled out a stack of papers copies of the letters and emails Mike had given her parents. As he recounted the details, Lisa looked horrified, tears streaming down her face. When Mike finished, Lisa wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. I am truly sorry for everything, Mike, for the lies, the betrayal. I don't even recognize the person who did those things. After a pause, Lisa hesitantly asked, Can you tell me about the letter where Greg and I joked about my chauffeur? Mike hesitated but decided to be honest. You were mocking me. Every time I drove you to the airport, you joked with Greg about it. You even laughed about the times I'd call your hotel room early in the evening, pretending everything was normal. Lisa's face crumpled as she sobbed. I can't believe I did that to you. I am so sorry, Mike. Mike sighed, feeling the weight of the past. It is all behind us now, Lisa. I have had time to heal and move on. The conversation shifted to Lisa's medical condition. She explained that she was experiencing seizures and doctors were still experimenting with medications to stabilize her. Unable to work, she had resigned from Reynolds Lawson. Her parents were consulting with a lawyer about suing the insurance company and Greg's estate for her injuries. After about 15 minutes of small talk, Mike decided it was time to leave. Sensing the finality, Lisa quickly asked, Do you think we could start over? I know you might never forgive the new Lisa who betrayed you, but I'm trying to find the old Lisa again. Maybe if we spent some time together, you could see the person you used to love. Mike took a moment to respond, choosing his words carefully. I'm sorry, Lisa. For me, there is no old or new Lisa, just the person I loved and lost to Greg. I've moved on and it took a long time to get to this point. I can go back. Lisa looked devastated but nodded, understanding. Mike stood up, ready to leave, as Lisa's parents returned to the kitchen. They exchanged polite goodbyes and Mike left, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. As he drove away, Mike thought about the evening ahead with Carol and Chrissy, feeling grateful for the chance to move forward with his life. He realized that while the past was painful, it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience and the importance of self-worth. As Mike stood up to leave, Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Did you find someone else? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. I think so, Lisa. I think I have. Lisa looked down, her tears falling more freely now. Is it the dark-haired woman with the little girl? Mike was surprised. Yes, that's her. How did you know? My parents saw them at your house and told me, Lisa said, still wiping her eyes. After a moment, she added, You deserve someone who will treat you better than I did. With that, she stood up and quickly left the room. Mike walked out, leaving long before Lisa's parents realized he and Lisa were no longer in the kitchen. A month later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon in April, Mike and Gary used a rented truck to move Carol and Chrissy from their apartment to Mike's house. Things had been going so well between them that they decided to take the next step and see if they were meant to be together. Chrissy was excited to have a yard to play in and her own big room. Mike had moved his computer to a corner of the living room, and the room it was in was now freshly painted and decorated for a little girl. A large box in the garage held a Child-S playset swing set, waiting to be assembled. The three of them began attending church regularly every Sunday, and Mike noticed that Lisa's parents rarely attended the same church. He didn't give it much thought. 4 months after Carol moved in, the minister announced that they would be getting married the following Saturday and invited the congregation to attend. They decided on a small, informal wedding at the church rather than City Hall. Chrissy was thrilled to be her mother's only flower girl and was excited about having a new father. Mike made sure Chrissy knew, Frank Jansen will always be your father, but I will be happy to be your dad too. He and Carol agreed that Chrissy would keep her father's last name, even if Mike legally adopted her. Mike insisted that Frank's sacrifice wouldn't result in him losing his connection to his daughter. Mike and Carol spent an hour on the phone with Frank's parents, explaining their upcoming wedding and their plans to keep Chrissy involved with the Jansen family. The conversation ended with a promise to visit Chrissy's paternal grandparents for a week during the summer. They decided this trip could also serve as their honeymoon. Their simple wedding ceremony went off without a hitch, with friends and family gathering at the church. It was obvious to some that Carol was pregnant, and Chrissy made sure everyone knew she was going to have twin brothers. Chrissy was ecstatic about the arrival of 2 brothers and proud to call Mike her father. A week later, while Mike was working on the exhaust system of the family car, preparing for the trip to visit the Jansens, he ran into his former brother-in-law, Robert Kane. Robert informed him that he and Susan had attended the wedding with Lisa, but they had left shortly after the ceremony because it had been difficult for Lisa to be there. Mike was puzzled. Why did she come to the wedding? I thought she'd be upset seeing me marry Carol. Robert shrugged. She thought watching you get married would help her move on. It was tough for her, but she said she was glad she went. The 2 men chatted until Robert said, I almost forgot to tell you. Lisa's claim against Greg Lawson's insurance company has been settled. Since it looks like she won to be able to work again, she received almost $2 million. Part of the settlement included Greg's apartment, and that's where she is living now. She hopes being there will help her regain her lost memories, but the doctors aren't optimistic. They think she has recovered all she is going to. Mike felt a pang of sympathy. I hope it helps her, but it doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Living surrounded by reminders of him can be good for her mental state, especially since he is gone and she only remembers the good times with him. 2 years passed quickly for Mike and Carol. Their 2 sons, Frank and Mike Jr., were soon joined by a younger sister named Mary Ann in honor of her grandmother. As their family grew, their house began to feel cramped. They debated whether to add an addition or move to a larger home, deciding they had another year before they needed to make a decision. On a quiet Friday evening, the phone rang and Carol answered it. After a moment, she called Mike to the phone. He was surprised to hear Joseph Kane's voice. I had to call you, Mike, so you wouldn't find out from the papers tomorrow. Lisa is dead. Robert found her today when he went to visit. It seems she passed away yesterday. The news hit Mike like a punch to the gut. He lost control of his emotions for a moment, his mind swirling with memories of Lisa, both good and bad. Carol, sensing something was wrong, stepped forward and took his hand, her touch grounding him in the present. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and relief, and said into the phone, I am sorry to hear that, Joseph. I want to extend my sincere condolences to you, Nancy, and Robert, Mike said, his voice heavy with emotion. Do you know what happened to her? Joseph hesitated before replying. I'm afraid she took her own life. She left a note for my mother and me, mostly personal things meant just for us. She wanted us to tell you that she never stopped loving you. She said she tried but couldn't let go of the memories of you. She also wanted you to know that it wasn't just about you. She had ongoing health problems, both physical and mental, that played a part in her decision. Mike was silent for a moment, absorbing the news. I had no idea she was struggling so much. I haven't spoken to her since that day I came to your house. I'm very sorry to hear this. If there's anything I can do to help you or Nancy, please let me know. They exchanged a few more words, expressing their mutual sorrow, and then ended the call. A few days later, Mike and Carol attended the memorial service for Lisa, where they were able to offer their condolences to her family. From Reynolds Lawson, only her friend Anne, the receptionist, attended. The service was somber, and Mike felt a mix of sadness and closure as he said his final goodbye to Lisa. A few months later, Mike learned that he was the heir to $500,000 from Lisa S.'s inheritance. Most of her estate had gone to her parents and brother, but a significant portion was left to Mike. He and Carol discussed at length whether to keep the inheritance. Mike worried that it would constantly remind them of Lisa and bring unwanted memories into their lives. However, in the end, they decided to keep it and set up 4 trust funds for their children's education. They used the remaining balance to buy a new, larger home. The new house provided a fresh start, and the family settled into a happy routine. Occasionally, they would remember Lisa, reflecting on her generosity and the times they shared. But these memories did not bring pain. Instead, they served as a reminder of the journey they had all been on and the importance of moving forward. The legacy Lisa left behind, though tinged with sadness, became a foundation for the future Mike and Carol were building together. They found that, with time, the past lost its hold, and the present filled with new hopes and dreams for their growing family. The trust funds ensured that their children would have opportunities that Lisa herself might have hoped for, turning what could have been a source of sorrow into a future filled with promise. As they looked to the future, Mike and Carol felt a sense of peace and gratitude for the life they were creating. The painful chapters were behind them, and they were ready to embrace the new ones, strengthened by the lessons learned along the way.